Let's look at how we can build a web application with Laravel and HTMX in this video. Now Laravel is the main framework used in PHP these days, and it's a framework I've used professionally in the past, but never used on this channel, so we're going to change that today. And we're going to build a basic active search page that uses HTMX with Laravel as the backend. And this will be integrated with a database, and if there's enough interest, I might extend this into a full series. And after we build this, we're going to finish with a look at some Laravel alternatives to using HTMX, and these include Livewire and Inertia. So let's get started. If you want to support this content, check out the Ko-fi page that we've got below the video, and give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want more of this content. Now I'm on the Laravel website just now, and if you follow this channel and you're a Django developer, this is basically the equivalent in PHP. It's the main web framework used to build web applications, and Laravel comes with a very integrated ecosystem. There's lots of products and lots of packages out there to enhance development if you are a Laravel developer. And it's built on PHP, so in order to follow along, you need to have PHP installed, and you'll need to create a new project using Laravel. Now I'm going to go to the documentation, and there's a section here on installation, and you can install on whatever platform you're on, and there's a section here on that. I'll leave a link to this page below the video. If we open VS Code here, I already have a project set up. So this has been scaffolded in Laravel 12, which is the newest version of the framework at the time of recording, as you can see here. And we've got a project here that's called Bookstore. Now what we want to show is a list of books, and we want to use HTMX to send dynamic requests to the back end and search for books that the user's typing into the front end, and return that content, swap it into the template, and have that be a seamless process. So to start with, we're going to need a database to store the books in. If we look at the database directory in the Laravel starter code, this is where we're going to place that database. Now to create that project database, we're going to run an artisan command. If we look at the root directory, you can see there's a script here called artisan. And this is essentially the command line interface for using Laravel. It provides a number of utilities, and one of them is the ability to run migrations. So we can run a command on the command line here, php artisan migrate. And because the project by default uses SQLite, we can create that database file on the file system. And these three tables at the bottom are all created. One for users, one for cache, and one for jobs. And again, if we go back to the database directory, notice that the file has been created here. So that's where we're going to store these books that we're going to have in this application. Now, if we have a database table for books, what we need to create in Laravel is a model for the book. Now, if we go to the app directory here, we have a models directory, and this is where the models are stored. By default, Laravel comes with one model, and that's this user model here. We're going to create a second one, and again, we're going to use artisan for this, so php artisan. And this command is going to be make model. And as well as the model class, we're also going to create a migration and a seeder class as well. And we're going to explain what these do in a second. And I should have specified the name of the model on the command line. We're going to call it book. And you can see what's been created here. We have a book.php model class. We also have a migration file called create books table. And we have finally this seeder here called book seeder. Now, if we minimize the terminal, we can go to the model class here, and you can see it's basically an empty class, but it extends the eloquent model class. And using this model here is how we're going to interface with the database behind the scenes. Now, what actually is in the book table? What we're going to do is look at the migrations directory here and go to this migration that's been created. So you can see here we're creating a table called books, and this has been created by that artisan command. So it's scaffolded all that boilerplate for us. And inside this function here is where we specify the columns for the given table. You can see by default we have this ID column, and that's going to be the primary key of the book table. And we also have this timestamps method being called, and that creates two columns in the table. One is created at, and the other is updated at. So that can track when the row was created as well as when the record was updated. Now to represent a book, I'm going to add a couple of extra things here. So first of all, we're going to use the table string method, and we're going to create a column here called title. And what that's going to do basically is create a title column in the book table, and the data type is specified here. It's going to be a string which will map to whatever the underlying data type is in the SQLite database. I think it's varchar. And we're going to duplicate this line, and we're also going to add a string field here for the author of the book. So we've got this new migration file. What we're going to do is clear the terminal, and I'm going to rerun the migrate command, so php artisan migrate. And that's going to then apply this new migration here and create the book table in the database. So for those that are not familiar with Laravel, we have migration classes, and these provide an up function to specify what you want to change during the migration. And you also have a down function, and I should be saying method here because these are methods on a class. The down method is basically going to reverse the migration. So if you want to roll back the database schema, you can do so as well. Now the final bit of setup for the database here is to look at the seeders directory. So we created a book_seeder.php file, and that has a method called run. Now you might be asking, what is a seeder in Laravel? So let's go to the documentation. This refers to seeding the database with data using these seed classes. So it's basically a way to populate your database by running one of these seeder classes. And we're going to see how to do that just now. So let's go back to the class that we've created here. And in the run method here, we're going to create a number of books. So in order to do that, we need to bring the book model in. So from app models book. And then inside the run function, what we're going to do is use the book model, and we're going to run a method here called insert. And I'm going to pass in some books here. So I'm going to paste these in. So it's an associative array of books. And each book has a title and an author. And I think these are all real books, but I'm not going to lie. I did get AI to create this list. So here it is, and you can add your own books if you want to. Let's now go back to the terminal, and to actually run a seeder class, we can run another artisan command. So it's php artisan, and then we're going to reference db, and then that has a seed subcommand. And we're going to pass the name of the class that we want to run here, and that's going to be book seeder. Now let's execute that and see what happens. You get the info statement here, and then it returns, and we don't get any feedback at the end here because we've not done anything in the run method. But I'm going to open the database, so let's go to the database directory and open this database here. And by the way, I'm using the VS Code SQLite Explorer extension. If we open this database, we can look at the table here. So that's right at the top, the books table. And if we show that table, you can see we have the 10 books inserted into that database table. So that's the database setup. We have data that we're going to show in the application. I'm going to close these files now. And what we're going to do now is create a new controller. And that controller is going to handle getting all the books from the database and passing them to a view, which is a template in Laravel. And that template is going to render all of those books out to the page. And that's the response we're going to send back from the controller. And again, we can use artisan for this. So php artisan make. This time we're going to make a controller. And the name of that controller is going to be book controller. So that's created the controller class. You can find that in the app directory and in this http/controllers subdirectory. And if we look at what's provided, we have a class that extends the Laravel controller class. And if you're familiar with Django, controllers are essentially the same as Django views. And that's somewhat confusing because views in Laravel are similar to Django templates. Now, as well as the controller, I want to make a view, which is essentially a template. So we're going to run another artisan make command, php artisan make, and we're going to make a view this time. And let's call this book list. Now, when we run that, that creates a view. And in Laravel, if we close these directories here, inside the resources directory, that's where we have the views. And you can see a Blade template has been created here called book list. Now, Blade is a specific templating language that Laravel provides. And we're going to see examples of that very soon in this video. Now, if we look at the template here, we've got a div with a comment in it. And that says, live as if you were to die tomorrow, learn as if you were to live forever. Very inspiring stuff here. But let's remove that. We don't want that at all. What I'm going to do now is just paste in some boilerplate into this template. So we have the HTML root tag. And then we have the head tag with some metadata and a title. And also the body tag here that just has some text at the moment. Now we want the controller to return this Blade template, so let's go back and open this controller now. And I also want to fetch all of the books from the database, so we're going to bring the book model into this controller. And let's create a function here within the controller, so it's going to be a public function called index, and this is going to return a view. And we can open the body of this function, and we're also going to need to import this view. So I'm going to do that at the top here. And then inside the body of the index function, we can return a view. So this view is a function. It's a global helper function in Laravel. And this can be used to retrieve a view instance. And what we pass as the first parameter is a path to the view within the resources/views directory. Now our view is called book list. So we can just pass that in there like that. We don't need to worry about the .blade.php extension. It's called book list. And then what we can also do is attach data that can be passed into that view. So what we can do here is create an associative array, and let's pass in a key of books, and we're going to use that book model that we imported and fetch all of the books from the database, and that's the way we can do this in Eloquent. So we take the model book and we call the all method. So this is a pretty simple controller method here. I do need to use the correct syntax here because we're not using JavaScript or Python. And let's now save this. We're returning the book list template and we're passing in all of the books from the database to that template. Now, one thing we're missing at the moment is a route to actually reference this controller. So what we can do is go to the routes directory. So I'm going to close resources here and we can open the routes directory. And there's two files in here. The one we are interested in is web.php. And at the top of this file, we're going to import the book controller class. And when we want to fetch all of the books and show them on the page, that's going to be a GET request. So in order to set that up, we can copy this and we can go to a new function here. So it's the route GET method, and we're going to send a request to /books. And instead of using an anonymous function like this as the argument, what we're going to do is we're going to actually reference the controller. Now the syntax for this, if we go to the documentation on controllers, you can see here that you define a controller class and then you can reference that class using these routing methods. So we get the class here like this, and then we reference the method on the class that we want to use. So we're going to do that just now. Let's go back to VS Code. We're going to use our book controller here, and we're going to get the class. And the method that we defined was called index. If we go back here to book controller, that's the name of this method. So we're going to reference that here and save this file. And finally, we're ready to actually show this. So what I'm going to do is clear the terminal, and we're going to run php artisan serve. And that's going to start the server and serve the web application on port 8000. So when we start the server, we get this Laravel welcome page. But if we go to the /books route that we set up, you can see this page at the moment in all its glory. So we can now actually start adding books to the page. Let's go back to the book list blade template. And what we're going to do here is we're going to target this body here and actually render these books to the page. So instead of this div here, I'm going to replace that. We're going to create a new div here with an ID of results. And that's going to be important. We're going to use that later on when we add HTMX to the project. That's going to be the target for the response content from the server. And we're going to add the content for the books into this div here. So I'm going to paste this code in just to speed things up a little bit. And notice that we're using some blade directives here, such as if and also for each. Now we're checking if we actually have books in the database. We can use the isEmpty method for that. If we don't have books, we can just render a simple paragraph telling the user that no results have been found. Otherwise, we have this else clause. We then have a UL, an unordered list, and then we have the for each directive in Blade, and we're looping over all the books that we are passing into this view. Now for each book, we're just rendering out the title and the author. So if we go back to the web page, when we refresh this page, we're going to see each book, and that appears in a list, as you can see. Now it's not very good looking, it's not the best styling. We're not going to focus on that at all in this video. But what I do want to do is add this list here to a partial template. And the reason for that is because when we add HTMX and when we add the search bar, we want to return this set of results here and have those search results appearing on the page. So instead of all of the books, let's say we type in Mockingbird, we want to only see that appearing on the page. So we're going to do the search on the back end and return this div with the ID of results. So I want to extract that to what's called a partial template. So let's clear the terminal here and we're going to run php artisan make. And again, we're going to make a view here. And this view should be in a partials directory, and it's going to be called search. Now when we execute this, you can see on the left hand side, it creates that partial subdirectory, and we now have a search template. What I'm going to do now is cut this div out of the parent template here, and we're going to paste that into this one here. And once we have that content in the partial template, we can then include it in the parent template here. So let's go back to the book list. And Blade has an include directive, very similar to the include template tag in Django. And we can then pass in the path to that template under the views directory. So that's in the partial subdirectory and it's called search. So now that we've restructured that, let's go back to the terminal and run the serve command. And when we go back to our page and refresh the page, you can see everything is still shown. Now what I want to do here above the list is add a search bar. So let's go back to the parent template, which is booklist.blade.php. And just underneath the title, I'm going to paste in this input here. And I think I've pasted in the title again, so let's just remove that. So we've got a simple input of type text, and it has this placeholder of search. Let's save that and go back to the page, and you can see that appearing above the list. Now the idea here is that when the user types in a particular piece of text, it's going to perform that filtering behind the scenes, take all of the books in the database, and then filter to see which ones have a title or a description that contains this. And I don't think we even have a description, it's just going to be the title that we're looking at. And it will pass those filtered results to the template partial that we created and then return that for HTMX to swap into the page. That's the workflow we're going to try and create. So at this stage, we need to think about installing HTMX. So I'm going to open the HTMX documentation and let's grab the CDN import for the video and we're going to place that into the head tag. Now in a larger project, you wouldn't be including all of this HTML every time you want to create a new view. You would create some kind of base template for that boilerplate. We're not going to do that in this video though. What we are going to do in the input here is we're going to define a GET request when the user types into this. So in HTMX we have HXGET, which allows you to send a GET request on a particular action. And we're going to send this to a /search endpoint. And the trigger for that is going to be the key up trigger. So whenever the user types into the search bar, we're going to trigger that GET request. And we're also going to set a final HTMX attribute here called HXTarget. And the target essentially determines where the response content is going to be placed into the DOM. Now, if we go to the search blade here, we have a div with the ID of results. We can reference that using the selector syntax here. And that is going to tell us that when we return a response from the server, it's going to be swapped and going to replace the content in this div. We'll see exactly how that looks in a second. Let's go back here and just save this template. And we now need to define this search route. So let's go back to web.php. And I'm going to duplicate this line of code here. We're going to create another GET request. And it's also going to use the book controller. And we gave that a URL of /search. And inside the book controller, we're going to create a new method also called search. So let's go back to the controller class now. And we're going to define that within the controller. So let's create another function here that returns a view, and it's called search. And we're going to inject the request object here. And this is going to be used to extract the query parameters from the request. So if we go to the input, for example, we have an input that has a name here of query, and we want to extract whatever's sent to the server. We're going to use the request object for that. So let's define the body of this function. We're going to extract that query using the request object. So let's start with that. And the way to do this is to take the request, and we're going to call a method on that called input. And we're going to pass query into that, and that should match whatever you give the name in the input. So once we've got the query object, we can then perform an eloquent query to the database. And we're going to get back some books when we do that. So we're going to use the book object, and instead of getting all of them, we're going to use the where method. And we're going to perform this filtering on the title column. And we want to get all books where the title contains the query that's been passed to the backend. In other words, the user's search query. So we're going to use the SQL-like expression. So we can pass like as a second argument to where. And the expression we're going to pass is going to be the third argument. And we're going to use that syntax there. If you're familiar with the like expression in SQL, this basically means any number of characters, including no characters. And we can pass the query from the user into this string using that syntax there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to call the get method at the end of that to get those results from the database. So we're using the book model here, and we're filtering on the title column. And we're only going to return from the database the books whose title contains this expression from the user's search. And that can be in the middle of a string because we're using these wildcard operators before and after whatever the user's search query is. So that's going to be essentially a contains expression. What we can then do from this is just return the partial containing our filtered books. So again, we're going to use that view helper function in Laravel. And we're going to reference this time the partials.search template. And again, we're going to pass some context data. So we're going to create a key called books. And that's going to reference the books that we fetched from the database. So we can pass that like this. And we can now save this file and test this out. And actually, before we do that, I've noticed that I'm using this expression here. But if we want to actually expand this variable called query into the string, we need to actually use double quotes in PHP. So we need to replace that like that. And you can see the syntax highlighting reflects that change now. So once we save this, we can go back to our page. And I'm hoping that this is going to work out of the box. So let's search for the silent patient. And you can see that it's now doing that filtering. Every time we press a key, it's sending that HTMX request to the backend, and it's filtering what we see on the page. Now the bottom two are Gone Girl and the girl with the dragon tattoo. So if we search for that here, you can see it filters and returns the correct results. So that is all dynamic. It's all working now with HTMX. Every time we press a key, we send a GET request to the backend. We get a filtered set of results by querying the database and using that like expression. And then we return the partial populated with those books to the front end and replace this starting list here. And we could take this further. So for example, we could look at the input element that has the HTMX attributes. And instead of sending a request every time the user presses any key, what we could also do is add a delay to that. And let's say that's 300 milliseconds. Once we do that, we can go back to the page and refresh this page. And this time, instead of sending a request every time we type, it waits for 300 milliseconds to see if the user stops typing before it sends that request. And that has some benefits. It stops your server being inundated with AJAX requests every time the user presses a key. Often you're pressing a number of keys because you want to search for a specific term. So adding that small delay, that's a trigger modifier in HTMX that can help you, and it can help prevent the server being inundated. So we've seen here how easy it is to write an HTMX driven application in Laravel. We can use these blade templates and define partials just like we would with any other language. And the partials can contain blade directives such as if and else statements and for each loops. And in our controller classes, we can define functions that handle the logic for those HTMX AJAX requests. and return the given partial to be swapped into the front end. Now I want to finish this video just by discussing alternatives to HTMX that come built into Laravel. So I'm going to stop the server for now, and we're going to go back to the documentation. So I'm on this front end page here, and I'm going to leave a link to this below the video. And I want to look at a couple of things here, and that's Laravel Inertia and Laravel Livewire. Now we've seen this approach here where we used PHP and Blade templates, but there are a couple of other things we want to look at here. Now I'm going to look at Livewire to begin with. This is a framework for building Laravel-powered front ends that feel dynamic, modern, and alive, as it says here. Just like front ends built with larger JavaScript frameworks like Vue and React. So what we do in Livewire is we create components that render a discrete portion of the user interface, and they expose methods and data that can be invoked and interacted with from the application's front end. And the classic example is this counter component. We have some state on the component class called count, and we have methods such as increment, and the increment method is going to of course increment the count state, and a render method that determines what view to return. Now the corresponding template here can actually reference those methods. So here we have a template that contains that dynamic value of count, and then when this button is clicked, Livewire is automatically going to call that increment method on the component class, and that's going to then change the state and reflect that update on the user interface. So this is very reactive and it's quite nice. And for the Django users, this is similar to Django Unicorn that we've shown on this channel. Django Unicorn, I believe, was inspired by Livewire. If you're interested in a video on Livewire, let me know in the comments. And as it says here, we can also use Alpine.js alongside Livewire to sprinkle JavaScript onto the front end when it is needed. And that combination can help you develop nice interactive web apps, but maintain the power of a full stack framework such as Laravel. Now Laravel 12 has introduced a number of starter kits. Of course, there's some for React and Vue applications. And if we scroll down here, you can see a section on inertia. Now what on earth is inertia? Essentially it bridges the gap between your Laravel application and your modern React or Vue front end. So it allows you to build these full-fledged modern front ends with those frameworks, but it also leverages Laravel routes and controllers for routing, data hydration, and authentication. So that's quite a complex description, but if you're interested in a video on inertia as well, let me know in the comments. So this allows you to have a React or Vue.js front end, but you still write normal routes and controllers in Laravel. But instead of returning these Blade templates from the controller, what we return instead is an inertia page. So let's have a very quick look at the example to finish. Here we have a controller function in Laravel, a show function that takes an ID. And what we're returning here is not a Vue or a Blade template. We use the inertia render method, and we're returning a page with that method. Now, if we look at the inertia page, this corresponds to a React or a Vue component. And that's typically stored in the resources directory. And any data that you give to the render method, as you can see above, we have data of user. That is going to be used to hydrate the props of the page component. So if we look at the component here, we have a simple React component here called show, and that user that was passed from the controller is now available as a prop to that React component, and then we return some kind of JSX layout. Again, if you're interested in Livewire or inertia videos on the channel, let me know just below this video, but that's going to be all for the video. I hope we've demonstrated how simple it is to use HTMX alongside Laravel, and we've also noted that there are alternatives if you want to use Livewire or inertia alongside a React or Vue application. So thank you for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you've enjoyed this content, and if you want to support the channel and see more of this type of content, check out this Ko-fi page that we have just below the video. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.